Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and buenos dias, and welcome to the Daily News Flash with myself, Ron Swanson, Paula M, and our flippin' awesome special guest, Andrew Lowney. We are going to get into it in just a minute, okay? But I just want to say to everybody, thank you for being here. Thank you for giving up your time this morning, and I hope you're having a fabulous day. I have had an interesting 24 hours since we last. And now the stream playing on another. There we go. That's what you call professional. However, like I say, whoever's had a good day. Paula, tell us a little bit about the rain, the apocalypse that's going on there. What has been happening?
Well, a part of the mango tree fell on the roof on the front of the house, and the whole ceiling collapsed. Part of it, so it's been interesting. So I have to rush and fix it today because it's gonna keep raining. So, at least it's not boring.
Well, yeah. So, Andrew, for the last however many weeks, it's been torrential rain where Paula is. All of our farmland has been decimated. And I just want to say as well, a massive welcome to you, Andrew. Welcome to the show. Thank you for agreeing to come and talk with us. A lot of you have been asking for someone to come on and touch on some topics that are a little bit more hardcore than what we do on the Daily Show, which is what we're going to be doing with our interview with Andrew this afternoon. And again, thank you for being here. So listen, Andrew, just for anybody who is watching this back, who's watching the side chat, just give us a little rundown, a little introduction about yourself, and just sort of set the stage for people, because I think you have got a knowledge that is second to none from who we've had on the panel. And I think a lot of people are going to be really, really interested. So just introduce yourself and just take us through a little bit where your special expertise lies.
Right. Well, I'm what I would call myself an investigative biographer. My background is I read history at Cambridge, went on to do a doctorate at Edinburgh University, returned to Cambridge as a fellow. I've also worked in publishing for a long time, but I'm now a senior research fellow at the University of Buckingham and professor of biography in Ulster. And I started off writing literary biography, a book about the author of the 39 Steps, John Buchan. Moved on to writing about spies, which was the subject of my PhD. I was the Times intelligence correspondent. In fact, was part of the 6-man team who set up the Spy Museum in Washington.
Wow.
And then I moved on to writing about royal biography. I liked challenges to write about subjects which haven't perhaps been examined in the detail that they should be. And so the first of a trilogy of books on royal marriages was a book on Dickie and Edwina Mountbatten, who famously had a very open marriage. The second was on called The Traitor King, which was about the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, the famous love story, or was it? And then my next book, which comes out next year, is about the happiest divorced couple in the world, the Duke and Duchess of York. And that's a book as much about financial scandal as sexual scandal. So one of the challenges I found is that writing about living people is even more difficult than writing about historical figures. There I can often rely on archives, not necessarily in Britain, but somewhat private archives across the world. Writing about Prince Andrew, you have all sorts of FOI exemptions, which prevent us looking at anything to do with him. And of course, there's this huge inertia of silence around the royal family. They know that they don't need to behave well because their behavior will not always be fully scrutinized.
Yeah. It's an incredible array of knowledge that you have, spanning so many different areas, Andrew. But before we dive into anything, right, you need to tell me, we need to touch on the spy stuff a little bit, Andrew. Do you know what I'm saying? We need to talk some James Bond stuff here.
Well,
so
always happy to talk about
hit us with I mean, I imagine you've heard some pretty incredible stories. I imagine you've met some very interesting people when you've been doing research into spying and spies and all that whole subject. And obviously, it's fascinating to anybody from the outside. But have you got any stories you can share surrounding your time and doing all your work around that area?
I just want to say something before the introduction that you said to Andrew. You have this set of skills. It just reminded me, what's the name of that movie with Liam Neeson? You have a particular syndrome.
Yeah, Taken.
Right, I must watch it.
Oh, you've never seen Taken? Oh man,
Yeah.
just watch the first one. Don't
Oh,
be tempted by the second one.
That
Second
is
one is trash.
famous. That is famous. He gets a phone. I have a particular set of skills. You know,
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
hunt you.
Well, Andrew,
Well-
you fall into that category. I will say that right now.
Well, I don't know. I mean, actually, what was so clever about the people when I interviewed them for the Guy Burgess book, and I began researching the book, it took me 30 years. Began researching it in 1984. The book came out in 2015. But the
Wow.
advantage of that was that many of the people who knew him were still alive when I started. So I interviewed a lot of people who were at school with him, university, served in the Foreign Office, and indeed were spooks. And by the end, the people who perhaps had been reticent in 1984 were much more open about speaking in 2015. But what I did find was that they always wanted me to take them to an expensive restaurant to interview them. I'd go there, and then I'd look at my notes at the end of the meal and found that I'd actually written down absolutely nothing, and they'd got more information out of me than I got out of them.
Yeah.
So they're pretty smart. I mean, the other thing, of course, is, can you believe everything that you're told? People are spinning the whole time, whether you're talking to politicians or to spies. So you've got to verify your information. There was a real problem getting information. The Russians were quite happy to talk, ironically, but were the
Okay.
Russians just blowing their own trumpet because the Cambridge Five were a success, or were they trying to drive a false narrative and produce fake news? So it's always difficult to know who is actually telling you the truth when you talk to them. And even the documents can be manufactured and disguised.
I just wanted to ask you something because, every time I did a video, that the only strike I have in my channel, I did a video last year. It took me almost 9 months, Andrew, for reals, to get information, even to track some pictures, because everything has been so cleaned up on the net. You know that. I was very factual. It was about Prince Andrew, Fergie, Meghan, and stuff. And within, I don't even think the video reached an hour. It got taken down. I got an immediate strike for conspiracy theories. So I sent YouTube all the receipts. And I said, if you can find that anything I'm saying here is not factual, because I appealed it. They said that it wasn't about being factual or not, that it just certain topics were not allowed on YouTube. So I did another video yesterday. But you have to almost approach it being like a funny story, for real. It's like,
Yeah. Well, I think in some ways the central theme of the books is that our history is being censored, and it's being censored by documents being destroyed or not released, and false narratives are created, and the rich and powerful are protected. And it's a real problem. Freedom of information now is a joke. We've actually in a worse position than we were when freedom of information rules came in 25 years ago. So that doesn't surprise me. I mean, I know with Prince Andrew, all the files on Prince Andrew are closed until 2065, when he'll be 105. For example, the internal computer at the Department of Trade, all references about him have been removed. There's a cleanup operation going on the whole time. When I did the Traitor King, I found that the files in the National Archives in Britain had been very heavily weeded. You can tell that because the index doesn't reflect what's meant to be in the file. But I found mirror copies of these files in the Bahamas, covering his period as a governor there, which are much more extensive. When I was researching Mountbatten, I found an FBI file where someone actually had told the FBI in 1943 that he was a PDF. I then asked for further files to be told that the files had been destroyed. And when I asked when they'd been destroyed, I was told after I'd asked for them. So they'd been kept for 60 years and destroyed, presumably at the behest of the British government, because they didn't want this story coming out, and this has been a loophole they'd missed.
Yeah. Listen, one thing you said there was people in powerful places, okay, getting away with things. And history seems to repeat itself a lot, Andrew. Okay, the only thing that seems to be changing is how quickly the common folk, okay, or the regular people can distribute information. Okay, take us back to the Mountbattens. Take us back to when you started writing your book, and of course the horrendous history. Just sort of, for maybe because some people may not know the full story, give us a little bit of an overview about the Mountbattens, and of course we will be going into this in more depth in the full interview later on tonight, 8:30 on the Sean Atwood channel. If you're watching right now, make sure you subscribe, make sure you share, make sure you leave nice comments, do all those things because you're good people and it's free. So give us a little overview. Okay, because like I say, later on we're going to get into the meat of it all. But
Mountbatten was the last great grandchild of Queen Victoria. He was the mentor to several generations of British monarchs. His best man for his wedding was the future Edward VIII. He was very close to George VI, indeed plotted with George VI for the wedding of the Queen and Prince Philip, who was his nephew. He was the mentor of the Queen when she came to power in 1952, and he was the honorary grandfather of Prince Charles, and probably the most important influence on him. So, I mean, that's 4 generations of British royals that he's advising and very close to. But he's also the last Viceroy of India. He's Chief of the Defence Staff. He's the first Sea Lord during Suez. He is the Supreme Allied Commander during the Second World War. I mean, he is one of the major figures of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And he kind of eclipses the whole of the 20th century. He's born in 1900. He's killed by the IRA in 1979. And pretty much he pops up and knew everyone, from Churchill and Roosevelt through to Chiang Kai-shek and you name it. He knew them and worked with them. Very close to a lot of the people in Hollywood, for example, had an affair with Shirley MacLaine. So it's an interesting crossover between the world of politics, international history, and showbiz.
It is, and it's interesting that all of those areas seem to have murky waters, Andrew, especially when it comes to the subject matter that we're referring to, because he wasn't just a monarch, he was a prolific monarch. You know, he like you just said, he has a long history of achievements within the monarchy. So
I would call it achievements very, very carefully, because I don't think he really had achievements. I think, but this is just my opinion. I think there was a massive cover up and all the screw ups he did. Like before we were talking about Norway. When he was
very, he had good spin doctors. I mean, he saw the importance of a very strong public image, and he had a huge department working for him very early on, promoting him. He was good looking, he was related to the royals, he was well connected. He used his wife to forward his career. So, for example, during the Second World War, when he should have been court-martialed for disobeying orders, he actually sent his wife to see George VI, and he ended up with a decoration instead. So he knew how to play the system and work it. And as he became a more and more powerful figure, he had a strong mentor, not only in George VI, but also in Churchill. They couldn't afford for this great hero to have feet of clay. And so he was protected. So at a time, for example, when homosexuality was banned in the armed forces, indeed, it was illegal in Britain until the 1960s, he was protected by his superior officers, and he was abusing his position as a naval officer to have affairs with junior members of the service. But I interviewed his chauffeur from 1948, who was still alive in his 90s. And he had been ordered to find out where the brothel was in Malta, because the male brothel, because Mountbatten would want to go there. So, on one hand, people were being kicked out for being gay, and on the other hand, if they were sufficiently senior, they were being given special privileges to support them, that life, a secret life. And what is so odd is here is an ambitious man who must have been concerned that he would be found out, and yet continued to live this very dangerous double life.
Well, I mean, he's not the only one. This is the thing. It seems to be something that is very prolific within his family. And I mean, I say prolific because we've had a couple of pretty extreme members of the monarchy, the king's brother. I mean, I think we all know where I'm going with that. With such close proximity to Prince Charles, okay, when the Savile scandal broke, all of this, it raises questions about how much everybody within that family knows about the family and what's going on, because there has to be whispers within corridors of the monarchy. And do you think that we're going to see a shift perhaps when William is king? Do you think we're going to see a shift in the perception of these antics, shall we say?
Well, I don't think William. There have been some certain rumors about William and his marriage, but otherwise, he's been a pretty uncontroversial figure. He's very careful not to get too close to benefactors who may put one in a difficult position. His father has not done that. I mean, there are a lot of stories about the deals that have been done for money going to Dumfries House. So I think William is probably okay. He's going to have a slimmed down monarchy, fewer people on the fringes to cause embarrassment. Sure. But I think there will be a much tighter control of news management. I know that's difficult with social media and with smartphones and things, but I think it will be a very controlled and tight ship in a way it hasn't been up till now. But you're right, there are a lot of stories going back, and they've largely been successful in suppressing them. And if you remember, they're actually very effective at using the courts to shut people down. Everyone now signs non-disclosure agreements. And if you remember the Paul Burrell case, when he was about to give evidence in court because he was accused of stealing material from Diana, and the Queen, right at the last minute, remembered that she'd allowed him to take all sorts of things, including Princess Diana's underwear, and sell them.
I didn't say her underwear. Her underwear, sorry.
Yeah, there was all sorts of things, but that was one of the, the last thing they wanted was him to appear in court on oath. And there are a lot of stories, for example, about Fawcett, who works very closely with the king, and other members of staff, and things that were seen, things that were in a private box that Diana left when she died, and Paul Burrell had recovered. So there are a lot of secrets there, and it's only really when court cases come or there are leaks. We remember the squidgy tapes and with Diana and one of her lovers, and also, of course, the Camilla tapes with the tampon tapes with Camilla and with the king. So it's only when these things emerge that we have any insight of really what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you something now that you've touched upon that. Do you think that is why Harry keeps bringing all these court cases as a way of blackmailing them and saying, you know what, I could say anything here in court?
Well, I mean, the threat that he's always presenting is that he might write another book, or his wife might write another book. And they're not subject to non-disclosure agreements. So that's always been the threat. It's always been the threat with Fergie and Andrew, that she will dish the dirt or use cutouts to tell the story in the way that Harry used Scobie. So I think the court cases are because he really does feel that the press has behaved very badly. I mean, his phone was hacked, and he's part of a wider group of people who feel the tabloids went too far in what they did. It was illegal. But, that's a classic example where a lot of the small fry went to prison for phone hacking, and the people who authorized it and knew entirely what was going on at the top of the organizations have been able to get away scot-free. And some of that stuff is now beginning to come out. Will Lewis is under a lot of pressure, who was at the Times and elsewhere. Rebecca Brooks and Piers Morgan are also under some pressure to reveal exactly what they knew. So I think he does feel, Harry, that he is avenging what happened to his mother, that she was in a sense killed because of pressures from the media. And he doesn't want to see the same again. But the problem is he's a complete hypocrite. And one moment he wants to lead a private life, and the other he is trying to use the media to make money and to push some of his agenda.
Well, he's doing exactly to the royal family what he doesn't want people to do to him, which is basically betraying their confidence, right? Because he, from what I understood, he was extremely paranoid about his information being leaked by his friends. So he used to test them. He used to feed them false info to see what ended up in the newspapers, because he was such a paranoid guy. I mean, he's upset that news about Meghan Markle and himself are out. And, I find so many parallels between him and Prince Andrew about the arrogance and the fact that that entitlement is like, like the law doesn't apply to me. That's just my opinion, Andrew, because if it were any of us who brought that court case, destroyed evidence, and did all kinds of things, we would have been tossed. That would have been tossed out a long time ago. We would have been held in contempt instead of giving him 20 days to explain himself in a letter. And
I agree. The courts are giving him an easy ride. I mean, the courts don't want to touch anything that's royal. I mean, the courts haven't, or the police and the FBI didn't want to investigate Andrew after allegations were made, even for him to come forward as a witness to give them more information, not necessarily as a person who was under any sort of threat. So you're absolutely right. They know that the media will give them an easy ride, and they know they can behave exactly as they want on their own terms.
I've often said, Andrew, that there's a bunch of stuff that we are maybe not privy to with regards to the monarchy and laws that were maybe made hundreds of years ago to protect princes and kings from courts. And how prevalent is the excuse of can't talk about it, royal secrets, for a royal in a court case? Because I feel like Harry's most recent court case, he used that excuse when it was about handing over hard drives and things like this. How much of a realistic get-out clause is that for a monarch who's in the court?
Oh, it's very realistic. I mean, it's the get-out-of-jail-free card. Anything that comes up to do with the royals in terms of asking questions on FOI is basically batted back using what the Section 37, which is anything to do with the royal family. When I tried to get protection files from the 1920s and 30s for the Duke of Windsor book, I was told that if they were revealed, that they would affect the present safety of the royal family, which is ridiculous. I mean, technology has changed. These actually files are not protection files. They're really about substance for the people who are protecting them. And I said 20 of these files have been available for 20 years. The judge asked me to produce them. And when I went to get them out of the National Archives, I found that they'd been closed. So they're shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. And the irony is that I won my case. I've now got access to the file I wanted, but the files that I used to support my evidence are still closed several years later, have not been reopened. So it's a ridiculous system. And even Andrew, when he was working as a public official paid for by the taxpayers, working for the Department of Trade, and therefore not as a royal, all that material is still closed. I think there is a real concern that people feel that they're above the law.
Yeah.
No one could be above the law.
You talked in the interview you gave me. There's quite a couple of things that I just wanted to bring up. You said that the files as trade, if I understood correctly, as trade envoy, are sealed until 2065.
All files on Prince Andrew are sealed. But what is particularly galling is that these files relate to a government position, and under Public Records Act, they should be open. In fact, no one seems to be able to know what would claim any knowledge of them. Neither the Foreign Office or the Trade Department, who were the two departments that tasked him, claim they know anything about them. Now, I've been putting requests in now for several years, repeated requests. And the problem is that they have two get-out-of-jail-free cards, or several. One is they claim national security, another they often claim law enforcement. They will say that there's a cost compliance issue here. It's too expensive for them to look for this material. And then if you ask too many questions, they say you're being vexatious, and we don't have to answer that. So there are lots and lots of reasons they can basically prevent us from scrutinizing institutions like the monarchy. And we have a new government in Britain who claim to believe in transparency and accountability. But I'm afraid there was nothing on freedom of information in the manifesto of any of the parties. No government wants any form of scrutiny, and certainly the monarchy doesn't want us to see what they get onto behind the scenes. And this is important because we pay for them. They rely on our support. We pay for their security. And I think we're entitled to know what they're doing. And one of the problems with Andrew was that he seemed to be using his role as trade envoy to make contacts which he could use himself in private business, and using trips that were paid to go abroad to go and play golf.
Yeah, I one of the trips he used to make a lot of trips to New York. One of them was when Eugenie moved to New York for 2 years, and I remember he used trade whatever his position to fly to New York, and at the same time he used it to help Eugenie move into her condo or whatever it was. And we found out about it much later, because this is another thing you did say also, that you know how the royals have their agenda made public of the places they're going to go, and what they're, where they're going to open an envelope here or whatever. And with Andrew, they never published it beforehand. It was always afterwards. Oh, he's been here, by the way. Oh, he went there, by the way.
Well, also they didn't. I mean, the court circular isn't always accurate. Things are emerged from other people speaking, or indeed from they have to produce every year the gifts that they're given and declare them. And so there were gifts one of the ways that people discovered some of these trips was that he was receiving gifts, particularly expensive watches, but other things, particularly from the Middle East. And people said, we hadn't even realized he'd been there. He makes a lot of private trips. He uses the jet of a man called David Rowland, with whom he has a business relationship. And even when the court circular says something, we then discover, when you do a bit of research, that actually the court circular isn't even true. So one of the episodes when Virginia Giuffre claimed that she slept with him in New York, he said, I was in Boston. I'm sorry, I couldn't have. Look at the court circular. And then research was done and talked to people, and they said, well, actually, he cancelled his trip to Boston for Outward Bound. And it was clear he was back in New York. So, there are, again, one of the things I found with my research is that he uses a whole series of names. He doesn't register companies in his own name, but in other names. He works through cutouts and other business associates. They're trustees, who buy houses. So it's all disguised, and you kind of wonder, why is all this financial stuff being disguised? What has he got to hide?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that are hidden within those files, Andrew. Sorry, Paul, on you.
But also another thing I was always surprised is people were talking about Fergie, that Fergie has this amazing love story with Andrew, how she's been loyal to him. My opinion is that the only reason, and then you kind of said it the best way I can think of, is like she actually was an obstacle she put obstacles forth so Andrew would not, remarry. And I do believe that part of it was because had he remarried, I'm sure she would not have been able to keep living at the Royal Lodge and keep getting all the privileges and remaining in the royal fold. So she actually played an active role on him not remarrying, and with the men on the island and everything else. It's this woman, I am blown away that she's still around, and not only around, now she's fully back on the limelight.
She's very good at wangling her way back. I mean, the king, doesn't have the emotional energy to deal with her. I mean, he's always been very worried about her because she does bring the monarchy into disrepute. But the fact is, yes, she's abused her position, and she's going to continue doing that. She still markets brands, for example, using the word Duchess, and she knows that he's her calling card. As soon as she's no longer in Royal Lodge, where she of course has pretty good standards of living, and as long as she's not Duchess of York, she's really nobody. And this is with the great concern Philip had. He wanted his son to cut loose from her. But there are mutual support organisms, really, because she supports him when he's down, and he supported her. When we think that she was prepared to sell access to him for £500,000, that would have been the moment when she was caught doing that, and it wasn't. The tip-off came. She was caught in the sting because people were aware that was going on. That would have been the point to cut her out totally. But she pops back. She turns up on Oprah, says that she needs to be better and everyone needs to forgive her because she had a terrible childhood. And then she goes back very cynically to doing the same thing all over again.
Yeah, she's the same thing. It's like people forget that. You know what people tell me? Oh, she's not like Meghan Markle. She hasn't sold out the family. And I'm like, yes, she has. Yeah, I mean, this woman it's awful. And the problem that I find that the royal family have is because they have allowed, Meghan Markle can point to precedents. Wait a minute. You can tell me not to use the royal title. Fergie, I mean, and the Duke of Windsor people, the problem is that, when the Duke of Windsor lived, there was no internet. So we didn't see the deals. People are not aware of the deals that he used to make. I mean, he really cheapened the monarchy with the brand deals that he had.
Well,
With
he was
the
investigated by French banking authorities, and his secretary took the can and resigned. There are a lot of, criminal activities, frankly, that were going on that were just covered up. Sorry, I interrupted you, but yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, we've got several cases at the moment. There's one with something called Gate Ventures, where Chinese investors were brought in with Fergie as a figurehead and to invest money. Now, none of that money was all spent particularly by the chairman, who was using it to entertain, to pay people to see them, like the Duchess of York. He was even spending huge sums of money on things that he said were going to bring in business, which had nothing to do with bringing in business. And that money was whittled away. We've got another case with a man called Salman Turk, where money mysteriously appeared not only in Andrew and Fergie's account, but in the accounts of the children, which they couldn't explain. It was said that this was money that Andrew Salman Turk said Andrew would get someone a passport, which of course he had no power to do. There were stories that this was a birthday present or a wedding gift for people, again, that they hardly knew. So, there are a lot of questions there, but the press didn't really cover the story. And it's very difficult to follow some, for example, the charities that Fergie has set up and to divide the activities between charitable work and, her promoting herself and her businesses.
And one thing I wanted to ask you also, I'm sorry, Ron, I just want to ask you my question.
That's right, Carol.
There is this. I always believe that the government, people, what people feel most likely, me, at least I do, helplessness, that the government, the parliament is allowing this to happen, because at the end of the day, it is a constitutional monarchy, and there are rules put in place to avoid everything we're seeing, and yet Parliament refused to enforce them. I mean, why?
Well, there's a rule in Parliament that you don't criticise the royal family, but there was an attempt several years ago to have a register of royal interests in the way that politicians have to register income. And that, I'm afraid, didn't go anywhere. So any attempts to reform and to make the monarchy look more transparent are always shut down. And it's not so much the senior and working royals. It's the Zara Phillips and the Peter Phillips of this world who are promoting products on the back of being royals rather than on their positions as sports people, I would argue. And that cannot be good. There needs to be scrutiny of why. For example, there's a man called Johnny Hon, the man who ran Gate Ventures, who has pictures of the royal family scattered everywhere, the idea that he is very, very close to them. He's got people like Zara and Peter Phillips and Duchess of York on his payroll. And it's not always clear what they do. When I put these questions to Johnny Hon, he didn't answer them.
But what do you think? A lot of people are talking about the York girls, that they're different than the parents, that they should be brought back, that Beatrice is so nice. I've always been of the position that they're absolutely like their parents. I mean, Beatrice, we talked about it earlier. Beatrice thinking that it was a good idea for her father to give that interview because she thinks that he's done nothing wrong. Or do you think that's the case, or that's part of the entitlement, or they believe that is okay behavior?
Well, I think the role models haven't been great. I mean, they've mixed in with sort of Euro trash all their lives, and have grown to be as entitled as their parents. I mean, lots and lots of stories about police protection basically costing huge sums of money, and yet they really were no risk. And these police protection officers were just taking them out of nightclubs on their gap year. I mean, both of them are married with young children. Both of them ostensibly have careers. So it's difficult to see how they might, what they might do. I mean, they claim that they do charitable work, but there are a lot of. I mean, I'm afraid there's a lot of controversy around the daughters, and I think it would be foolish to give them any sort of prominent role. The one who has emerged as someone they really do want to promote in the next generation apart from the Prince and Princess of Wales children, is the children of the Earl of Wessex, or now the Duke of Edinburgh. And I think particularly the daughter there seems to have, behaved faultlessly, and is someone who everyone feels they can do business with. But Andrew's line is that his daughters are princesses of the blood, and that they're entitled to all sorts of things. And the problem is that I think the British population have got wise to the way they abuse their position, and are not very happy for them to be given more perks.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that entirely. Listen, everybody, if you're still, sorry, if can you please make sure you like and share? Make sure you're liking up the stream. Make sure you're sharing it for me. I just want to turn a corner here, Andrew. Right? We've gone over some of your books. We've discussed the context and how serious some of the secret lives of these individuals are. Okay, some less legal than others, shall we say. Have you found that you've been subject to retaliation for anything that you've put out there? That was actually a question by Fred.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. They try to discredit me as a historian, say I make it up, say I'm not a serious writer, and they use one of the clever things is they use tame historians who basically they feed material to and who will do their bidding, and in return those people are meant to disparage you. So, for example, when Traitor King came out, Mountbatten had made a front page story of the Sunday Times. It had been serialized in the Times, and yet not a single broadsheet covered it, because I discovered later people said there was nothing new in it. Now, the book is based on extensive research. I think it does recalibrate our view of Edward VIII. But that was one thing. In Britain, you can do what's called a subject access request, where under data protection rules, you can put in for information that public authorities have on you. And I was told that the Cabinet Office, which is the government department liaising with the monarchy, had so much material that it would take 650 hours to even just process it for me. So I put in the requests for 6-month intervals. And what it showed was I was being monitored, not just in my professional life as a historian, and they were following me to bookshop signings and talks to alumni organizations, but they were also monitoring my business activities, trying to find anything that might possibly be used to discredit me. And I also found that they were briefing MPs and others quite incorrectly about me and my research and my books. And that only came out because some of this material was released. Now, when I tried to get more of this material, because often you only just get literally a sentence, which is quite against the rules of subject access requests, and took this to the courts, I was told I was being vexatious and that I would just, basically it would be dismissed. But yeah, this is what they do. I had a famous case where I was seeking access to the private personal diaries of Lord and Lady Mountbatten. These were their personal letters between them, the diaries that they kept, little pocket diaries, which had been bought with close to £5 million of taxpayers' money to be opened to the public. And for some mysterious reasons were not being opened. The information regulator, the ICO, ordered the Cabinet Office and the University of Southampton to release this material, and they refused to do so. They appealed. I was dragged in as a party to the case, and because the Information Commissioner basically wasn't doing anything, I was forced to take on legal representation, and the whole case cost me close to, over $500,000. Which I didn't really have. And I hoped we would get costs, because actually on the eve of the hearing, 33,000 pages of documents were released, biggest ever release of FOI material, a historic victory. And for the first time ever, the Information Commissioner took a public authority to court under contempt proceedings. And yet even then, the judge didn't feel that I was entitled to my costs. And so one of the things they try to do is to break you financially, reputational wise, anything they can use.
I was going to say that it sounds like they knew they would have to give up the information, right? And with the right judge, they can make sure that if they have to hand it over, they can ruin you financially. I mean, that's what it seems like, because I mean, traditionally, if you win your case, you aren't having to cover your costs, right? I mean, it seems purposeful.
Well, certainly the legal advice I got was that we were entitled to our costs because of what happened. The material, when it was released, proved to be completely innocuous. It wasn't even they were protecting any secrets. It was a power game, and it was to make an example of me, I think.
Yep.
So,
you know, it was to discourage others.
Sorry. Of course.
Do you think it was to discourage others? Because I find that
Absolutely. And, you know, I couldn't afford to appeal. I couldn't get pro bono support to carry the situation through the courts. The media, to be honest, were supportive, but there are only so many times you can report the story. And parliamentarians were really, once they asked a parliamentary question and were given some lie back, they didn't really want to push it any further. So one comes to just a dead end, and most people give up. I'm determined to keep going. I'm determined that you know, our history needs to be told properly. And my book had come out in 2019. This case material was released in 2021. But I kept going because I felt it was important that this material should be available. If I just dropped out and when my book came out, this material would still be closed.
Now, you've got a new book coming out, okay? Do you fear that they're possibly going to up their game after this new book comes out? Because it's one thing to be out in secrets about people who aren't around anymore, but certainly when we're talking about the King's brother, do you think you're going to see round 2 coming your way, Andrew?
I'm sure, absolutely. You know, and whether it will be legal challenges from some of the figures, I mean, it's going to have to be kept very carefully read for defamation and libel. And I've got to be careful what I say on things like programs like this, because people might well come after me. But yeah, I mean, we tried to make a program on Mountbatten, and one of the producers, both highly respected television producers, one has had his house broken into. And I've had cases I've known of my own authors writing controversial books where they have had their computers seized by the police.
Wow.
On the basis that it had child porn on it. And I understand that they claim that the pornography had been downloaded from an external server. So it's not stuff they'd even looked at themselves. So they will find anything to undermine the reputation of what if people speak out.
Yeah, and what you're referring to there is the planting of digital evidence, just for, because you said some pretty powerful buzzwords there. That
what did you say? What is that, planting digital evidence? I'm sorry. I'm
planting digital evidence. So, so before the computer era, you'd have to break into someone's house, plant some photographs in a safe, call the police, they'd turn up, they'd check the safe, and oh, look, a crime's been committed. But now with the lacklustered take that a lot of people have for their cybersecurity, you would be horrified to know Microsoft, Windows, Apple, how many ways there is to get access to systems, especially if you're on an open, like if I'm sat in my car outside your house and I can get to your Wi-Fi and all your systems are on your Wi-Fi, there's some things that can be done. But when we talk about digitally planting evidence, how catastrophic, right, is being accused of being a PDF file, accused of being an R-word person, right, and it just being off of loose hearsay. For example, the Russell Brand scenario that happened at the start of the year. I mean, that was a huge thing, and then just nothing. Just nothing. Just anonymous sources, Andrew. Just anonymous sources. Do you see what I mean?
Exactly, Julian Assange. You know, same thing.
Correct. So it's wild. So you talked a little bit about keeping yourself safe in the book and making sure all your facts and things are lining up. Do you fear that at some point there could be something fed to you, right? Perhaps some, I don't know,
misinformation,
misinformation.
Absolutely, that's always the problem. That you're fed material that it turns out to be rubbish, and you've bought it, and therefore that discredits you. And that's what's happened with Carl Beech. He was brought forward, the fantasist, and he made a whole series of mad allegations, which I'm afraid some people took seriously. And because he was then dismissed as a fantasist, which he was then used to discredit the genuine people who had made complaints.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, one of their tricks. And I mean, I'm constantly being approached by people saying I'm the illegitimate grandson of Edward VIII, whatever. And, I've got to be very careful about, what I investigate and what I say, because if things can't be fully verified, that would be a stick to beat me with.
Well, here's an interesting one. Talk one second about it. Talk about things that can't be verified. Okay. Why is it then we all get spoon-fed things such as I can't sweat, right, on a BBC newscasting from a certain royal? Why are we so happy to just digest nonsense as a public as a whole? Because I mean, am I right?
I think we trust the monarchy. We trust some of these people. I mean, I think we're less trusting now of the media and the monarchy. And that was a ridiculous thing, because could easily be verified. And I think that in some ways the press did hold him to account. I mean, there are plenty of pictures of our friend sweating coming out of nightclubs at exactly the same time as he was seeing the woman in Kinnerton Street. There are a whole series of other claims. He claimed to have met the financier who was bankrolling him and his wife in 1999, and yet we know from the flight logs that he met Fergie in 1998. We know from a letter that was written to the Times by his former private secretary that he actually met him in the early 1990s. So there are lots and lots of stories that can be easily checked out and proved to be incorrect. But because no one has really called them to account, they've got away with a lot of lies. But you then wonder, if they've told those really obvious lies that we can check, what other lies have they told us that we can't check?
100%.
Again, the accounts of being in Boston for the Outward Bound thing, when a bit of research showed that he hadn't actually fulfilled that public engagement, and it's not very far to fly back from Boston to New York, particularly when you have the use of private jets.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a two-part question. You said something very interesting about you being called vexatious litigant. Yet we have Harry. Pretty much every lawsuit he's bringing. I mean, I don't know how many lawsuits this guy has brought, yet he's allowed to continue and not be called. I mean, to me, he's a textbook definition of vexatious litigant, right? That's number one. Number two, you said that they try to discredit it, and one of the things that you mentioned is that in order to reduce the sales in your books, they say, oh, that's already stuff that's out there, so people don't lose interest because it's, well, if it's something that's repeated already, why should we buy it, right? Because biographies are always being written and new stuff comes out. It's a different take, but that's one of the ways they do it. And I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank goodness for Amazon. I'm always very grateful to people who review the books on Amazon, because that is, the people have spoken in some ways. Those are the most important people. The problem with the media is, everyone scratches everyone else's back, and they're not always genuine reviews, either pro or anti. Whereas Amazon, at least, this is just by weight of numbers. I mean, we've now got over 2,000 reviews of Trader King, and I think about 2,000 of Matt Batten. So these are people who, or Goodreads, have read the books and hopefully enjoyed them and made their comments. And that's what's really important. And that sort of circumvents all the problems I had with the more established media and the people who just are not covering my books, and doing things like this, and people getting in touch. Often from doing programs like this, people will say, well, I actually met one of your subjects, or I know this story about them, and I pick up a lot of information from talking to at festivals or talking on programs like this.
Do you find that, though? Don't you find that about the vexatious litigant, how Harry's allowed to continue trashing the monarchy, and yet because I find it as a YouTuber, if people like you, who are your credentials are impeccable. So, and look how they try to discredit you. And as a YouTuber, when we try to get information, it's like we talked about it in the interview you did in my channel, that I actually phoned Buckingham Palace asking for the document of the doctor's name and stuff like that for Archie, right? Because that should be public because the child is in the line of succession. And then they sent me and they said, well, you have to put an FOIA to Parliament or whatever. And they gave me the email. I put the information request, and I got back the answer saying that they're not a hospital, that they don't deliver children, and then in any case I should contact Buckingham Palace. But because Buckingham Palace is not officially a government institution, they're not bound by the FOIA things. I mean, it is so
to give you the runaround the whole time. I mean, I've got one of the things that emerged in this Mountbatten case was that material which had been freely sold by the family and had been bought with public money. So if it had gone, for example, to an American university, it would have been opened immediately and open to be seen. But the University of Southampton were allowing the royal family to come and look at the material and to take anything out they didn't like from these diaries, which go back over 100 years. And so I wrote to the King's private secretary asking for just more details of these visits, which they were refusing to release under FOI through the Cabinet Office and through the University of Southampton. And twice I've now written with letters that have to be signed for, and there's been not even the courtesy of a response.
Yeah. That's I mean, what do you think? Sorry, and what do you think is going to come forth once your book comes out? I mean, what is the biggest kind of like shocking moment if you during your I mean, if you can talk about it. I mean, because of course,
give us little tidbits, Andrew.
I can't reveal everything because clearly I need to keep some stuff back for the book. Of course. What I would say is that the real scandal for both Andrew and Fergie is a financial scandal, and they've been allowed to both of them make money in a way which I think is wrong. And has used their position to leverage connections, and people are stupid, and people will pay them and buy things just because it's them, and that seems to be wrong. But Andrew certainly leveraged his position as a trade envoy, and she has certainly leveraged her position as a member of the royal family to make money personally, and I will certainly be revealing quite a lot of detail about that, chapter and verse.
Well, listen, I think all of you who just joined us, make sure you like and share, make sure you subscribe. But we have got a really in-depth interview that'll be out tonight, 8:30 on the Sean Atwood channel with Andrew. So what I'd like to do is turn another corner here. Okay, we're gonna pack up the royals and ship them out. And we're going to just touch on some current events, okay? Because there was a lot of big words in the first hour of this show. I'm not going to lie. This is I'm perspiring from focusing on what is being said and Googling words I don't understand. But that's okay.
Somebody asked something about your ancestral home, Andrew.
Okay.
Andrew, somebody asked about your ancestral home, the story that you have an ancestral home. Can you is that right?
Well, no, I come from Scotland, but no, there's no real story there, I'm afraid.
My G. Okay, we've got a question here from Gix. I think you may have covered this earlier when you were talking about your path from doing the work on spies and the museum. What was it that got you interested into the first steps of your career? When you were at that crossroads in your life, making decisions, for your future. What was it that drew you to the work that you do, Andrew?
Well, I always wanted to write. My father had published a book. His mother had published a book. Her father was quite a well-known writer, Victorian writer. In his time, as well known as Rudyard Kipling. But the problem is you can't really make a living from writing. So that's why I went into publishing. But I was my first book was a literary guide to Edinburgh, which came out when I was in my 20s. And then I did the biography of John Buchan, who was a famous Scottish writer who I always rather admired. And that was revisionist in the sense of showing that he was depicted as a racist, anti-Semitic, anti-Semite, and he wasn't. And so I tried to present him as a much more liberal figure.
Yeah.
So people, knock me and say I'm trying to put people down, but actually, Buchan, I tried to build him up. I think he was a much more interesting figure than people realized.
Okay.
And I sort of moved on to spies because when I was at university at Cambridge, that was the period when a lot of the stories were coming out about the Cambridge spies. Almost every week, the newspapers had revelations about a new Cambridge spy. Because I think the real story there isn't that it was the Cambridge 5, but more like the Cambridge 50. This was a huge penetration, which wasn't just at Cambridge, but it was at Oxford, University of Birmingham, Imperial College London, and indeed in the Ivy League universities. So that sort of got me enthused about spies. And I suppose I liked looking at things which we had new material being released. Sure. Because MI5 and MI6 were becoming a bit more open about their activities. Files were being released to the archives, so it was possible to tell the story for the first time. And then I became interested in secrecy and cover-ups. And that's how I sort of moved into the royal family. And the royal family are interesting. They are important. Yeah, they are. They are pretty dysfunctional, which is very good. It's international appeal. And most books written about the royals are pretty bland and are written really with support from the press office and from a few tame contacts. Yeah. And so we weren't really getting proper historical biographies of royals. And so that seemed to be an opportunity to look at. And that's how I began the trilogy. Eventually, I'd like to go and do Prince Philip, again, a major figure in the British royal family, but who's never really had a proper full-scale warts and all biography.
Yeah. Well, you've sort of carved your own path. You've done this for many years, okay? And it kind of predates a lot of the digital world we're in now, especially with the AI and things like this that are kind of jeopardizing a lot of industries. What would your advice be to somebody who wants to follow in your footsteps, who wants to write, who wants to do this? What would your advice be for someone taking those first steps in 2024?
Well, I think the opportunities are enormous because you can still you can self-publish now. We haven't got you haven't got to go through trade publishers. We've got the internet, which has made research a lot easier, and social media. So quite a lot of the research I do is from British Newspaper Archive, Ancestry, looking up LinkedIn, even Twitter accounts, forums. So it's got easier. And I think the important thing is do your research. People always, I think, write and research and publish their books far too early. I probably only use about 10-15% of the material I research. So, for example, this is here, the file for one particular year for the Prince Andrew book. That is the level of research.
That's probably more words than I've read in a year. I'm not going to lie, Andrew. Right? That's
hundreds of thousands of words.
That's a thick file.
Then, so that's the important thing. Do your research, and then, and I think that's what people expect. They don't want gossip repeated. They don't want you just to draw on news cuttings. They want you to go out and interview people and to back up things, and not to put 2 and 2 and make 5.
Yeah.
And so you've got to always be very careful, to be quite sort of measured in what you say too. Often what's most effective is just laying out the information. You don't really want to, I believe, as a biographer, to intrude in the narrative. There's a tradition now of quest biographies where people basically are part of the story. And I don't think we should be part of the story. We clearly select the material to present our case, but we shouldn't, of course, not select material that doesn't support our case. And as a result is you often get a mosaic of impressions because, we are all very complicated people. I mean, there's a lot of very positive stuff in my book about Andrew and Fergie. Because that's what people told me and that's what I found. It isn't a hatchet job, which I think is the other danger. People go too far one way. It tries to be as balanced and authoritative as possible and fair.
Yeah.
Don't you find it though difficult, Andrew, sometimes because, for example, when we try to get information, a lot of people don't want to talk, or as you say, they might feed you information that's not right. And it's like always that fear that, hopefully they will tell you the truth, because a lot of people, they want to discourage others from speaking out. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So, for example, I have 75 pages of contacts for the Andrew and Fergie book. So literally hundreds and hundreds of names, thousands of names. And I would say 80% of them probably didn't even reply or said, no, I can't help you. But if it's a bit like if you kiss enough people, eventually someone will stop slapping you on the face and return the kiss. You've just got to keep going. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember talking to someone who said, well, when that picture of was taken in Central Park, the famous one, that there were a whole group of people around them. And so I went and interviewed the photographer and the journalist who were there, and they said, no, it was just the bodyguards and the two of them. So you constantly need to check what people have told you, because people will be trying to present a different narrative to what really happened.
Yeah. We've got an interesting question here, right? Anne-Marie, I think it was. So obviously Donald Trump had a bit of a mad weekend. I think we can put it lightly, Andrew, a bit of a mad one. With your expertise in being a historian and, all of the other occasions where this has happened, do you see any similarities between anything that's previously happened with regards to presidential assassinations and what happened with Trump? And if you don't, just give us your overview on it all. I mean, I just want to also reiterate to everybody in the side chat, I don't think anybody at this stage thinks Trump put that guy there to shoot at his own head, right? And it was all set up by, I mean, it's just a madness, right? But there's some questions, Andrew. I got some questions, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, people are raising questions. I mean, conspiracies are very difficult to organize. I mean, and the fact, someone is at some point going to break rank and reveal it. But I mean, to coordinate everything is pretty impossible. So it is cock up. But, you've got to ask questions about the security. You and I were talking earlier about a very obvious place for a sniper to be. Why wasn't that security area cordoned off? I mean, there was snipers below him, but no one seemed to be on top. And what sort of I found strange is that they were able to shoot the sniper very, very quickly, which suggests that he was in their sights. So if they could do that quickly, how come they hadn't noticed him crawling across the roof?
I'm going to give you some more madness, Andrew. Okay, so the nice lady in charge of the Secret Service, okay, she said the rooftop of that building, Andrew, was a bit slanted, so she didn't want to risk putting Secret Service agents up there because it might have been unsafe. Same roof as the other snipers were on. I might just point that out. There wasn't like well,
what about drones?
Dude, don't even get me started on why there wasn't drones with heat sensors, with AI tracking suspicious algorithms. Like, let's just say the budget wasn't there. We'll give them. I mean, we've got to justify things in our heads some way. But there was a video that came out of a man who filmed a cow standing on top of one of his barns. It had managed to get up on top of his barn, and the roof was absolutely fine. And again, what my point I'm trying to make is the barn that had the sniper on it and the barn that had the Secret Service agents that shot the sniper, it's the same roof. There's not some great difference between the barn that's 500 foot away from the other. I mean, and I say barn loosely, I mean they're proper buildings, but it just seems to me that somebody needs to be stepping down. Somebody needs to be explaining themselves. The fact that there's footage now of the shooter wandering around for an hour, okay, looking suspicious, parking his van far away, so he had to walk up there. He has managed to walk up there and wander around for an hour with an AR-15 rifle. Okay, it'd be one thing if he was just there to throw glass bottles, okay, and he'd got his ammunition from the crowd. But we're talking about, I cannot rationalize any of this. I feel like I could have done a better job with just Hollywood movie education on how to keep the president safe. And as I said in the Daily Show a couple of days ago, this is an easy job for the counter sniper team. There's no windows, there's no skyscrapers, there's no nothing. It's 2 or 3 places that they've got to keep
well, it shows you how history can so easily be changed. Think if it had been another inch,
it's wild.
Been back to JFK. But I think there are big questions for the security, and it does raise questions about, they must be looking at other episodes and presumably going to revise their techniques. But yeah, no, and I mean,
Yeah.
there are lots of very, very strange anomalies in the whole story, which, often this is a problem. History doesn't always present itself completely, so you can tie up all the loose ends. There are often unexplained bits that we just have to accept.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of questions about the staff, the bodyguarding staff, because when you've got someone as tall as Trump was, given a bunch of bodyguards that go up to his shoulders, doesn't seem to really make sense to me. And
Yes, they're quite small. Yes, that female Secret Service agent didn't seem like an obvious Secret Service agent, but maybe that was the purpose of it.
well, I mean, we all know we've all worked in places where every now and again you go into your job and you're like, oh God, it's that manager that's working, or oh God, it's this guy that I'm doing my shift with. Okay, there's always that guy whose weight you have to carry. I mean, it's not out of the question to say that it was the bottom of the pile people that were put on duty that day, because I'm sorry, in my opinion, there's a lot more to this. Coercion, collusion. Somebody is going to crack soon enough, and we're going to know. Or somebody's going to come close to cracking and then die of food poisoning before they get their story out. Andrew, it's just all
well. I think there's still questions about the shooter. I mean, what was the motivation? What was his background? None of that makes sense.
No.
Hopefully, some of that will come out. But I mean, will this change gun control, or will because I think the father had 20 of these sort of rifles. I mean, in the same way here in Britain, we have crossbows, and I can't see how anyone can justify owning a crossbow unless they're going to get up to some mischief with it.
I'm going to be honest. I have about 4 crossbows. I just think they're cool. And one day, I fired them once, Andrew. Right, once. Okay, and that's it. They've just been sat in a cupboard for years. But I like archery. I used to do a lot of archery and things like this. But I'll be honest, Andrew, I've had air rifles, okay, which are now banned and you have to have a license for, that are way less terrifying than what a crossbow can do.
Exactly.
A 175-pound drawstring crossbow is one of my crossbows, and I can't do anything with it. There's no fun to be had with a crossbow because you can do legally nothing with it. Okay, unless you've got a big bit of land and a field, or a friend with a field, it's just a big chunky ornament. It's just a big chunky ornament, to be perfectly honest. But hey, listen, I thought the world was going to come to an end, so I had to prepare for civil unrest. Okay, and somehow managed to get crossbows and in a whole entire British police issue Kevlar riot suit armor. I'm just saying. But I understand the devastation that crossbows can cause, and it's wild to me that a 177 break barrel air rifle that, at work, I remember being told to run outside and play when I was about 10 with the Diana break barrel air rifle and go and shoot cans outside. No one lost an eye. Nothing ever died. But crossbows are different. They sound like shotguns going off. Anyway, I don't know why I went off on a rant about crossbows for so long. That's okay. Another thing that's going on, which is a bit mad in this country, seems to be a lot of division, a lot of people not wanting to step in when things occur within certain groups in the UK. And I think we've seen some rather shocking things that have just taken place over the last sort of 24 hours down in Leeds. I don't know if you've seen any of this, Andrew, or heard any of this.
Yep.
But it was allegedly over social services removing 4 children from a family's home, and then a riot broke out, which there was meant to be no police activity for 7 or 8 hours, and this whole thing was just allowed to unfold. Now, when you watch this back, it's not difficult to realize that it is a specific cross section of our very diverse and awesome population in the UK. Why do you think we see this backstepping sometimes from the police when it comes to certain cultures in the UK? Because we often say that we've said in this show, the courts, the media, they don't want to touch the royals. I feel like from a societal point of view, there's occasions that keep popping up where the police don't want to get involved in things.
Well, I don't think it's particular segments of the population. I mean, I think we've seen it with police, on health and safety grounds, not going in to rescue people who've fallen into ponds and stuff. I think health and safety has become a more important issue, and it should not be the case with our emergency services.
Sure.
So people need to look at that. I mean, I think what's interesting is I thought there would be social unrest much sooner than this. I think there was a lot of tension over a lot of issues, which are not necessarily to do with race, but other issues as well.
Sure.
And I thought that might actually have happened under the last government. We're beginning to see it now. And it needs to be quite a robust response. I mean, we saw a robust response with the Extinction Rebellion people, the people who'd held up traffic so people couldn't get to the planes and couldn't get to doctor's appointments, going to prison. And I think, we now need to sort of balance the right to protest against the needs of the wider population and
interesting
their rights.
Okay.
So hopefully we may I don't suggest that we should get away from peaceful protest or authoritarian state, but I think the balance needs to be looked at again.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what you're saying, but I think in this instance, peaceful protest and rioting, it's fairly obvious that social rest has broken down, and as taxpayers, I feel like we're paying good money to. I mean, when was the last time you seen a man burn a bus down with a Bic lighter, Andrew? That is a new one for 2024. I'm just saying.
That's not peaceful protest. Absolutely not. And I live right by the West Parliament and Westminster, and there are constant demonstrations here. To the point you can't work. And the right to that's not a peaceful protest if people have got drums and whistles and are holding up the traffic, and there are 40 of them. That's not a peaceful protest. And we had Extinction Rebellion literally camping in the road outside the house. So we need to get law. I think we need to get our priorities right. We have nothing unless we have proper law and order.
Correct. For me, do you think there was an element of, they're kind of destroying their own part of the country? Like, because I always look back to the LA riots where the police kind of forced everyone into one area, let all the devastation play out, and then moved in. And I'm not saying that's what it is. Maybe it's a silly question, but do you think that is a common police tactic? Let them burn out before they go in.
I don't know what the police tactics are. I mean, I would have thought the diffusing the situation would be the most important thing rather than let it play out. But I think the fact that the police weren't there quickly, the fact that they turned up and went away at one point, then of course this just makes it open day for any of these people, because I think the problem is a lot of these protests are then infiltrated by people who are not supporting the protest but are out to make trouble.
Of course. I mean, 100 million%. But I mean, I'm not being funny. If someone came into my area and it took a bunch of kids away, I'm sure people would be kicking off. And it's just one of those stories, Paula. This is a big UK thing. I apologize. It's not.
No,
you'll know too much about. But I mean, how are you meant to deal with this? I mean, this is wild, and it is the way that it is. But I just wanted to touch on that this morning because it's a big story here, and of course, the big story that we're just going to touch on super briefly: Biden. Could he be stepping down? Is it over for him? I hope so, because again, launch codes. What do you think, Andrew? What do you think, Paula? Do you think we're going to see Biden step away? Are you invested in this at all? What do you guys think in the side chat? What do you think?
Didn't he get COVID? Apparently, I just think they're setting the stage for him to.
Yeah, I think someone shot at Trump and he went, "Okay, anyone asks, I'm isolating. I ain't going out for a while, okay? Until the big Pope bubble arrives that the Pope can stand inside and not get shot at and be fine. I ain't going back out there." But
for his own legacy, he needs to go, and for his own health, possibly he needs to go. I think that since the events of last weekend, I think probably Trump is unbeatable. So it's not really a job I think anyone wants.
Yeah.
You know, it's a poison chalice. So it'll be very interesting to see who does step up
Yeah.
there. I mean, I think the smart money would be to sit this out and then come in after Trump's done his term. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
They're saying that Michelle Obama is gonna step up to that, but I mean, I don't think even if Michelle Obama steps up, because you know, people want different. At least, you know, it seems like a dynasty now, like the same families in power in the United States, you know.
Well, I mean, Kamala Harris is clearly the obvious candidate, and I think if she wasn't to be the candidate, I think there would be quite a lot of upset. But you know, the convention is still a little way off. There's still a lot of things can happen.
Yeah, of course.
I think the Democrats need to write off this. It's a bit like the Conservatives. They need to try and just minimize the damage and regroup and come back next time.
But what do you think of everything? Where do you see this happening? I mean, with the politics, how do you think, for example, if Trump gets elected, when the king invites him to come over, do you think that this time Prince William and Catherine will actually host them, or you know, because Catherine didn't want to meet Melania the last time, but she did meet Jill Biden.
Well, I think the Prince and Princess of Wales are quite careful about their constitutional role. So I certainly think they will go through any official visits. I'm surprised by what you say. I know Meghan has strong views, but I didn't understand that Catherine did. But we do see the rise of populist politics all over, particularly in France at the moment and Europe, and clearly what's happening in Hungary. So I think it is damaging. You know, that it's back to the 1930s. People no longer have trust in the institutions, and it all comes down. This is what, in a sense, the whole theme has been about trust in institutions. They've lost that, and they then go for radical solutions or for people that they feel who will vent their frustration, and that's not good for democracy. And you know, there's talk in Britain of going to proportional representation, which will even further fragment our politics. But I do worry that if Trump's elected, that he will be isolationist, that Ukraine will not be supported, Europe will not be able to step up to the mark, and Putin will be emboldened to move on other countries. And it is a repeat of Hitler in the 1930s.
Well, listen, I mean, if there was ever a soundbite to end on, it's one with Hitler in it. All right, so I'm down with that. I just want to say, I think when it comes to the truth, journalism, historians, writing books, all of this, it comes down to perseverance. It comes down to muckling down, being focused, and driving through until you get the information or the story and you have closure on it. And I think we can all do with a little visual metaphors. Visuals are good to remind us, okay, to persevere. And today I have chosen a tiny dog.
Wait, I left
This little dog was locked in this room and it persevered.
Oh my God, how
Okay.
cute.
It chewed its way to the story, which is freedom in his case. I think a lot of us could learn a lot from this tiny dog who persevered. I mean, he didn't quite get out, but if he was left alone long enough, he would have got out of there. So be a little bit more like Tiny Dog. Don't give up, okay? Sometimes you just need to be there long enough until someone opens the door, okay? And it will eventually happen. I think I metaphored that, all right? Right? I think that was okay, right? Persevere. Maybe someone comes along and helps you. We got it. Yeah, that was a good one. Okay, so listen, everybody, thank you for being here. Now, please remember, 8:30 tonight, we have our Andrew Lowney in-depth. I'm going to trigger warning some of you now. Okay, there will be a trigger warning at the start of it. It will be algorithmically friendly. So, you know, you're not going to hear too many upsetting things that have to be said in a certain way, but it's still very upsetting. And I'm just preparing you all for that. And of course, Andrew, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. Paula, as always, thank you. I don't know where Siri's been the last couple of days. I think it's just
She's with my son. She's with my son. She doesn't look at me because my son is
You're
here.
dead.
So
You're dead to her
she's a
now.
cheater. She's a betrayer. I thought that dogs were supposed to be loyal.
Yeah. Well, no. Okay.
The big brother is here, so
Yeah.
forget mom. You know, like that sucks.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you to everybody across all platforms. I think we had about 1,200 watching today. Very, very, very good. Thank you so much. Please like and share. Come back if you're watching this, make sure you come and leave a comment for us in the comment section. We had a few comments that I was going to cover, but we've actually run out of time today, so we will get back to the comments on Monday. Please leave your thoughts, and we will see you tonight at 8:30. And Andrew, again, thank you so much, and look forward to our chat that's coming up this afternoon. So thank you all. Like and share. You're awesome. Catch you in the next.